Hello, everyone. My name is Carson Hunsucker, and I want to talk about the One Malaysia Development Broad, or 1MDB. So we'll start with the key players. These two men on the left are the main people involved in the scandal. And so Jolo, on the right of the picture, he's a businessman and financier from Georgetown, Penang Island, Malaysia. And he's really the mastermind behind this whole scheme. Then we have Najib Razak, who is on the left side of the photo, and he is the former Malaysian prime minister from 2009 to 2018. And for context, the 1MDB was established in 2009 during his first year, and all of the scandals came out in 2015. However, he was still allowed to stay in office for a couple of years somehow. Then we have Tim Leisner, who is a former managing director and chairman of Goldman Sachs in its Southeast Asia division, and Roger Ng, who is a former head of the Goldman Sachs Malaysia division. Then we have Riza Aziz. He's a friend of Joe Lowe's from Harrow School in London. He's the stepson of Razak and co-founder of Red Granite Pictures. All of that will make sense eventually throughout this PowerPoint. Then we have Rosman Mansour, who is the wife of Najib Razak and a fine jewelry collector, to say the least. So a little bit about Jolo's background because he's the reason this fund exists. So Jolo grew up in Penang Island, Malaysia, and he befriended Riza Aziz while attending Harrow School in London. Now, this is important because Riza is the stepson of Najib Razak. And so by befriending him, he was able to become friends with him and his family, which also included Najib. So he was able to get like an inside view into the family and have some connections with it to the Prime Minister of Malaysia. So before 1MDB, he was the director of Winton Private Equity Group. And while he was there, he realized that there was a ton of state money floating around in sovereign wealth funds, for example, the IPIC in Saudi Arabia. Now, because of his connection and because of this realization, he was able to convince Najib Razak to establish the 1MDB in 2009 as a sovereign wealth fund for the Malaysian people. And another side note, he did set up a bank account at Goodstar Limited, and this will make sense in the next slide. And there is seen with Paris Hilton on the left and Alicia Keys. He lived a high life, as we'll see. Um, So what's the idea of 1MDB? So basically the fund was established so they could borrow money from the banks. They would build massive infrastructure to benefit the Malaysian economy, and then they would pay back the loans from the success of the new businesses. So in 2009, they started slow. 1MDB borrowed from local banks, but eventually hit a ceiling and wanted to get more investments. So, but even within the year, like I think it was September of 2009, 1MDB and Petrosaudi agreed to a $2.5 billion joint venture deal. Now, 1 billion was supposed to come from 1MDB, 1.5 was supposed to come from Petrosaudi. However, $700 million of the 1MDB money was not found in the joint account, but rather transferred to a Swiss account controlled by Goodstar. And if you remember from the last slide, Jolo established a bank account at Goodstar not too long ago. So the identity of the owner of that account is hidden, but we can reasonably assume it is Jolo. And you might wonder how $700 million missing out of a joint account just goes unnoticed. Well, it didn't go unnoticed, but it was not brought to attention because two of the Petro-Saudi guys were in on the deal, and so they didn't raise any red flags. This happened again in 2010 and 11, where there was another $830 million investment. However, $330 million of it was siphoned out into the Goodstar account. However, 20 million of this 330 million was eventually found in Najib Razak's bank account, the prime minister. From 2012 to 2013, they needed credibility, so they issued a global bond that Goldman Sachs sold to investors. Goldman Sachs eventually raised a total of $6.5 billion for the fund. However, this is a little suspect because they earned $600 million in fees revenue, which is 10x what they should have earned. So that should have been a huge red flag for everyone. But what actually happened? What were they doing with the money? So the money was being laundered by layering it into shell companies with oddly familiar names. So they would transfer the money to and from several bank accounts, back and forth. And they would use like these weird names, like Blackstone Asia Real Estate Group. Now, it sounds good, but it's not to be confused with the real Blackstone Inc. And so it was similar enough to raise concern, or similar enough to not raise concern. And that's how a lot of it, they got away with a lot of it. Almost $1.5 billion was seen to be sent to Abar Investments Limited. However, there is no such title under the corporate structure of the real Abar. So again, similar name sounds good. It's not, it's fake. None of this would have been possible without Leisner or Ng at Goldman Sachs, and this is because they were like overriding the checks and balances of everything because it was an inside job. So when they get the opportunity to move this much money to and from different people and banks, they know that they're going to make a lot of money and other people are going to make a lot of money. So they just override it and push funds through. Where was the money actually going or being used to? So Jolo bought millions and maybe $1 billion or more worth of assets, luxury real estate, yachts, jets, jewelry, and paintings. We're talking about mansions in Los Angeles, penthouses in New York, mega yachts, Gulfstream or global jets, and Picasso, Monet paintings, crazy stuff. Jello also decided that he was going to fund The Wolf of Wall Street for $100 million. And so while he was in LA, hanging out in the Hollywood area, he heard about this movie that they wanted to make about Jordan Belfort, about how he stole funds and just loved to party. And I think that is exactly what Jolo is. So he probably felt a calling to make the movie. And so he funded Red Granite Pictures. Now, Red Granite Pictures is the producer of Wolf of Wall Street. However, Red Granite Pictures was co-founded by Riza Aziz, which is the stepson of Najib Razak, and remember his friend from Harrow's school in London. So they all tie together eventually. And again, he loved to party and gamble in the public eye. Now, Najib and his wife also bought really expensive stuff, but none of this was found out until after the 2018 election, and we'll see that soon. And they did not like to flaunt their possessions in public. So even the wife, she wouldn't wear half of her stuff in public because she knew it was just too expensive. And what was the breaking point? So the fund continued to go into debt, 11 to 14 billion dollars, and none of their investments were yielding any return because they weren't investments. It was just luxury items. 2015, it was reported that Najib had $700 million of the sovereign wealth fund in his personal bank account. Now, it's okay because he claims that 681 million of it was a political donation from the King of Saudi Arabia. Probably not true. But the even crazier part is the remaining money was transferred to a jeweler for his wife's tiara. And then after Najib lost the 2018 election, officials searched his house and found $273 million worth of jewelry, watches, sunglasses, tiaras, and more. 29 million of that was cash. And we can see on the left picture that they're just loading suitcases of goods into police custody. And so a total of $4.5 billion is believed to be missing from the 1MDB fund in total. So what are the consequences? Jolo somehow got off seemingly easy. He does have a few warrants for his arrest. He was sentenced 10 years in prison in Kuwait and another warrant for his arrest in Singapore. And he has restricted travel, but he hasn't actually spent time in jail, and he hasn't actually given up money for a fine. A few of his assets that he gifted to other people had been returned to the government by those other people, but nothing came from him. So I don't know how, but he got off seemingly easy, and he's supposedly on the run. Najib, on the other hand, the prime minister in the picture on the left, he was charged with criminal breach of trust, money laundering, and abuse of power. He got 12 years in prison and a $15 million fine. However, this was reduced to 6 million and 6 years and $11 million just a couple years ago, I believe. Rosma Mansour, his wife, again, she was charged with corruption, 10 years in prison and a $216 million fine. Sounds like a lot, but it was mainly just confiscating all of her assets in the house from the last slide. Tim Leisner pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit bribery and money laundering. He was charged with 25 years in prison and $43 million in fines. However, due to his guilty plea and his nice cooperation, he's actually spent no time in prison. Roger Ng, on the other hand, pleaded not guilty and is spending 10 years in prison. Goldman Sachs, the company, claims that they have no knowledge of any wrongdoing and blames this whole problem on just two rogue employees that they want nothing to do with. However, they were still forced to pay $2.5 billion to the Malaysian government to drop the charges and agreed to recover another $1.4 billion of missing funds. And again, like I mentioned earlier for Jello, he gifted several people items like, see-through pianos, grand pianos, Monet and Van Gogh paintings, real estate, jewelry, all kinds of stuff. And so after all of this hit the surface, then those people eventually forfeited their gifts to the government. So what's going on like right now? So the Malaysian government has assumed the 1MDB debt. They are currently on a 30-year bond due in 2039. All $4.5 billion is still not accounted for. Jolo probably has the best idea of where the money is, but he is supposedly on the run. However, we do kind of know where he's at. He's in Macau. He lives in Macau, we think. Um, but he's freely allowed to move between Macau and Hong Kong under Beijing protection and the protection of really high-ranking financiers. So again, he got off pretty easy considering that he was the main mastermind through all of this. When researching, this was a really complex scandal. And just the more I researched, the more stuff I found out. And I didn't even put half of it in this PowerPoint because it would be forever to go through every little detail. So we may never know the full extent of the scandal, but it's really interesting to learn about. Hopefully you learned something. Thanks.